Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. Both of the Santas that I previously covered, the one in the Santa Claus the movie and another in Miracle on 34th Street, were both joyful men who cared dearly for all the children in the world. They were also adamant about the work that they put in order to make each Christmas a merry one. But as we all know from the various portrayals of Santa, he's not alone in his mission. He has a reliable team of magical elves to help. Most of the time, we've seen them with the responsibility of building all the toys. Though in some modern cases, if they can't make them, then they know where to order the right presents. Though we sometimes do see them a lot more than just toy makers. Material as old as Rankin Bass's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer goes as far to show them having full control of the North Pole. It should come as no surprise that elves themselves have gotten their own stories for the holidays. They tend to focus on giving the elves more of their individual personalities, having them question their place in the world, or wondering if there is more to life than building toys. Today's subject focuses on all three of those aspects. In fact, the movie does a lot without making it feel overstuffed. It's a tribute to those old-fashioned Rankin Bass specials without being too sugary for a modern audience. It's a father-son story in which it's not too often a focus within Christmas stories. It's also a gamble because it was the debut of a star who was primarily known for his comedy from Saturday Night Live. So it was a good thing that Will Ferrell was the right guy. He knew how to make a tall elf man funny. He knew how to play the Christmas Pollyanna whose passion for the holidays and goodwill towards all men would spread throughout New York. This is a comedy that is most certainly not a cotton-headed ninny-mungans, Elf. So, keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times. Let's go for a ride. Each time I catch a screening of Elf in a movie theater, one scene always strikes the audience with a combination of ews and laughter. It's when he's left alone in his dad's apartment and he makes himself a breakfast of spaghetti noodles, candies, Pop-Tarts, and of course one of the main food groups of the elf food chart, syrup. The sight of Buddy smashing that all into his mouth and scarfing it is gross for the parents, knowing how much it's going to affect his system. Most kids, however, are going to wish that their parents could make this every breakfast. I mean, had I been as young as 9 watching Elf, I would have. Now that I'm in my 30s, the wishes of candy binges are long past me. But there is something from Elf that I do want more as an adult. What Buddy wanted more than anything was to find his place in a world that seems to have no place for him. He's too big for the North Pole, too naive for New York City, too overzealous for the Gimbel's department store, too stupid to stay at home, too childish for work, and even too nice for his dad. If he was cast out of all those places, then where does he fit in? Buddy went through an adventure to find himself and may have come to see that, well, he's fine the way he is. Buddy would get some pointers here and there on how to behave, but by the time the movie ends, we do see that he's still the same person. Even his stepdad unfortunately ends up being sat upon by his stepson. Buddy may have ended up as a father, but in a way still needs a father figure. but we're getting ahead of the story. We begin in an orphanage where a baby is alone for the holidays. He's too little to understand that he was a product of a young relationship, but the nuns hope that he'll have a home soon enough. It just so happens to be Christmas Eve, and quote-unquote home was gonna come for the child. Santa, played by Ed Asner, drops down the chimney to make his annual delivery, but is distracted long enough by the milk and cookies to be unaware of the baby entering his sack. It's not until he makes it back to the North Pole in which the child is discovered. The elves that witness him see the label on his diaper Buddy and assume that's his name. Without a home to go back to, he's adopted by an older elf that we only know as Papa Elf, played by Bob Newhart, and also happens to be the narrator. Buddy grows up with the elves, literally and figuratively, as his mindset is that of two things. First and obviously is that of an elf. He knows how to make toys, he can be a skilled skater and snowball thrower, and can even build the latest in extreme graphic chipset processors. But the second and most important detail is that he's an elf child. Most people that see this movie for the first time will wonder why Buddy acts like a giant kid, even though the elves he works with act adult, or at least as far as an adult you can be as an elf. The moment where he's in the classroom may seem like a fun moment that shows off Buddy as an adult, played by Will Ferrell, and even showcases some of the impressive effects. But there's a lot that they get away with in a scene that's less than a minute long.
Now, before we learn how to build the latest in extreme graphic chipset processors, let's recite the code of the elves, shall we? Number 1.
Treat every day like Christmas.
Number 2.
There's room for everyone on the nice list.
Number 3.
The best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear.
Along with the foreshadowing of the Christmas cheer that's going to give Buddy his big moment, we see him sitting next to a ton of elf children, yet he seems to be in his early 30s. This is because it's implied that elves age a lot slower. It's even said that Papa Elf is hundreds of years old. Buddy, of course, is naive to all that, and carries on as if everything is hunky-dory. This all changes when he overhears a conversation from other elves that reveal he's really a human. It's only now his Christmas-tinted glasses are removed and he sees that he never did, or would he ever fit into a North Pole that was barely able to hold his height. Papa Elf does come clean and reveals that his real father lives in New York City. After some encouragement from Leon the Snowman, played by Leon Redbone, Buddy sets off to see if he can find his place in the human world. As he would say later, I passed through the 7 levels of the candy cane forest, through the sea of swirly twirly gumdrops, and then I walked through the Lincoln Tunnel. Buddy's first impression of New York City is a lot like my own experience seeing the metropolis for the first time. An overwhelming sense of intimidation, but also curiosity of a new land. Buddy wastes no time in putting himself within the culture. He collects flyers, plays with the revolving doors, believes every sign he sees, and even finds his version of free candy from the gum stuck to the railings. The city already works to Buddy's advantage, as his goofy mannerisms primarily still make him nothing more than a face in the crowd. Just another weirdo like the millions that live there. The only thing that does make him stick out is his elf outfit that he stays in for the majority of the film. He eventually arrives at the Empire State Building, where he's assumed to be some kind of Christmas gram, and is allowed to go in and meet Walter. It's better if I just play how the interaction goes.
Dad!
All right, let's get it over with.
I walked all day and night to find you.
You look like you came from the North Pole.
That's exactly where I came from. Santa must have called you.
Oh, yeah, sure. He just got off the cell phone with me.
You did?
So, go on.
Go on with what?
Well, are you going to sing a song or something, or can I just go back to work?
A song? Yeah. Anything for you, Dad. I'm here with my dad, and we never met, and he wants me to sing him a song. And I was adopted, but you didn't know I was born. So I'm here now. I found you, Daddy. And guess what? I love you. I love you. I love you.
Wow, that was weird.
Walter, played by James Caan, is the complete opposite of Buddy. Walter has long since checked out of any sense of wonder and whimsy, putting all of his grown-up senses into his work. While calling him a workaholic would probably be stretching it far, Walter does have enough influence in which most are afraid to do anything that would disrupt his focus. He's always been the dominant force at home and work. If he's not excited for Christmas, then why should anyone else be? But does that stop Buddy from trying? Absolutely not. Buddy, dismissed as just a lunatic who wants money, gets thrown out as soon as he brings up his mother's name, Susan Wells. Security jokingly tells him to go back to Gimbals, in which Buddy does get another dose of being a fish out of water. We get perfume, an escalator, and a special present joke that if you've ever been a kid, you would have done the exact same thing. He eventually does get led into Santaland, the toy department decorated for the season, where he meets Jovi, played by Zooey Deschanel. Buddy's connection for the North Pole gets him in trouble when he ends up demasking the mall Santa that Gimbals hired, which I will still say that's on them for getting a dollar store version of an actor and waiting till mid-December to unveil him. Walter bails him out of jail and gets a blood test to confirm that Buddy is in fact his son. But aside from that, he clearly didn't know what to do next, as attributed to his conversation with the family doctor, played by director Jon Favreau. It's clear that family hasn't been on his mind in a while. He's been stuck on autopilot, with everything having run so fine, he expected his family to follow suit as well as his employees. With Buddy in the picture, he decides to bring him home and just see how he does with his second wife, Emily, played by Mary Steenburgen, and his second son, Michael, played by Daniel Tay. Other than putting a ridiculous amount of syrup on his spaghetti and going for a belch that I'm honestly jealous of, he does pretty well with Michael, giving him a much-needed older brother figure. This even cultivates into Buddy getting his first date with Jovi. This may be my favorite part of the movie, as we get all the things I really like about Elf. Their adventure into the New York night proves to be charming and very sweet. Buddy gets to take her to the things he first saw and hopes she gets the same feeling of glee that he got. She even manages to take him to something Christmas related he's never seen, the Rockefeller Plaza tree. He gets misty in his eyes, they skate, and they even seal it with a kiss on the ice. A nice touch of detail that's added is the Frank Sinatra cover of You Make Me Feel So Young playing. It's a nice homage to the New York City legend, and with the context of the story, Buddy knew just how to bring out the childlike wonder within Jovi. Now he just needed to make that connection with his dad. Buddy had wanted to try so earlier with some Christmas activities, and even went to work with him, yet only Walter saw him as a hindrance to his life. As far as his father was concerned, everything's fine. But even his own cracks start to get bigger when book sales have declined due to his own cheapskate ways. It all comes together when he brings in an acclaimed children's author, Miles Finch, played by Peter Dinklage, only for Buddy to come in at the same time.
You got, Damn it! I'm in love, and I don't care who knows it!
Buddy, not now. Can you please go back to the pit? I'll come visit you in a little while, okay?
I didn't know you had elves working here.
Boy, you're hilarious, my friend.
He doesn't. Get back to the story, please.
So, on the cover above the title.
Does Santa know that you left the workshop?
You know, we're all laughing our heads off.
Did you have to borrow a reindeer to get down here?
Buddy, go back to the basement.
Hey, Jackweed, I get more action in a week than you've had your entire life. I've got houses in LA, Paris, and Vail.
Oh.
Each one of them with a 70-inch plasma screen. So I suggest you wipe that stupid smile off your face before I come over there and smack it off. You feeling strong, my friend? Call me Elf one more time.
He's an angry elf.
Call me Elf one more time. Call me Elf.
You're an elf.
Buddy gets handled by this little person, clearly not being able to tell the difference between him and an actual elf. Miles storms off, leaving behind the last chance that Walter had at keeping his job. He sees his own life is over and takes his frustrations out on Buddy, telling him that he doesn't care for that he's his son and to get out. Buddy walks the cold Christmas Eve streets to figure out that if he can't be an elf or human, then what is he? This cultivates into the film's final act, or as much as it tries, with Buddy seeing Santa's sleigh crashing into Central Park. He makes it over there to find that the rocket the Papa Elf was in charge of malfunctioned, along with the monitor that reads the world's Christmas spirit dropping to 0. At the same time, Walter sees the error of his ways and goes to make amends with his firstborn son. This third act is definitely my least favorite aspect about Elf. What we get here is a combination of an action scene with the Central Park Rangers trying to chase Santa as Buddy is trying to get the sleigh flying again. Also in the mix is Jovi, realizing that Buddy's enthusiasm for the season is what may help everything and thus overcomes her fear of singing in front of people, leading the city to sing along to Santa Claus is Coming to Town. This of course helps, and Christmas is saved along with the sleigh flying without the need of an engine. But it does wrap up in a way that feels a little too convenient and aimless. The singing I get, and even Walter having a hand in the plan, is sweet, but the chase through Central Park comes right out of nowhere and is merely an excuse to try to make the stakes higher without a lot of context. All myth though, I do like the line of Santa saying that, "I put them on the naughty list, and they never forgave me." Aside from that, the movie still ends in an upbeat manner that gives me the warm Christmas feeling that I crave from these kinds of movies. Elf works great as a comedy, great as a Christmas movie, and great at showcasing the kind of comedy that Will Ferrell can excel in. Elf also works as a father-son connection story, and how Christmas can bring us the reminder on why we need that kind of connection. Children need their fathers, especially the ones that grew up at the North Pole with no social skills. The final product uses this aspect to make them go to the real world. Even though it would have been nice to have the movie touched on that just a tad more, it is clear that Jon Favreau first saw this as a Christmas comedy. One that needed to be something that could be watched by families each year without feeling too out of date. There's a lot to unpack with this struggle, even though it is considered a classic. I still really like the movie, even though I've gone back and forth on it. So, what's my personal history with this? In my Miracle on 34th Street episode, I talked about how Santa Claus would make me giddy and excited for the season. But, how about the elves? Did they hold the same candle that the man in the red suit had? The short answer is no, with a however. Thankfully, I can go into detail since I have a show. I think I saw elves as something similar to another Christmas decoration. They looked cool, but I never put a lot of attention on them, unless if I was watching them or maybe reading about them. Even the few times that I did see them at Disneyland in the Christmas Fantasy Parade, they left very little impact. The dancers playing them were throwing it all into their parts, but let's face it, they were just the opening act to Santa. As revealed in my last episode that covered the top 10 Christmas elves, my number one pick were the ones from the Santa Claus. They felt more like something I'd expect elves to be. Magical beings that built a community with their purpose being able to help craft the toys that Santa would bring once a year. It helps that since that they all look like children, There was something empowering to see that these kids were capable of doing something as important. They just seemed like the elves I wanted to see Santa working with. The Santa Claus as we know came out in 1995. Elf would be released in 2003. In 95, I was 8. In 03, I was 16. Most 16-year-olds wouldn't be clamoring to go see a movie about a Christmas elf. Not this guy, though. Yep, I was that weird kid that was still inclined to see most things that were playing. The other thing to note once more was that I didn't grow up with the Rankin Bass. I didn't watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, nor Santa Claus is Coming to Town like a lot of families around the holidays. Because of this, I didn't initially get that Elf was supposed to be a tribute to all that. I went in for 2 reasons. First, because I'm usually not one to miss any Christmas movie. And 2, it still looked funny, and this is considering that the early trailers weren't really highlighting Will Ferrell as the draw yet. On opening weekend, I went out with my mom as we were looking for something Christmas-based, not caring that the majority of the crowds were families with little kids. That's not to say that it can't be watched by little kids, but I always felt like this was a Christmas movie that was geared more for those above the 6 or 7 range. But regardless, the 2 of us were very surprised by how funny and charming this was. The story of a human elf searching for his place in the world works fine enough, but because the movie is a comedy above all, its goal rested on the shoulders of Will Ferrell. I could tell by the loud cackles of my mom that he was going to be a big star. I already knew he was a prominent force on Saturday Night Live, but I rarely watched them live. I mostly knew him from his role from the first 2 Austin Powers movies as the guy who suffered the most injuries and seemingly refused to die.
Hello up there! I seem to have fallen down a cliff. I'm still alive, but I'm very badly injured. I think my legs might be broken, but I'll try to stand up. Oh! Yes, they are broken. Perhaps you could toss me a Band-Aid or some antibacterial cream. I'm in an extraordinarily large amount of pain. The bone has gone through the skin. I fear it might be gangrenous. The wound is beginning to smell a little like almonds, which is not good. Please? No one?
Sorry.
I'll try the other leg. Oh!
He may have not had a youthful look, like a lot of 30-somethings you'd see out of a character like this, but he brought a lot of innocence into the character, making him very easy to sympathize with. Even though I didn't quite understand that the way he was written was meant to be a reflection of the Rankin Bass style, his persona reminded me of just how excited I used to get around Christmas. Don't get me wrong, I never lost it all even as a teen, but even guys like myself were still vulnerable to the typical teen angst, and part of me wanted to be that too cool for school guy that I thought most wanted to be. It's a good thing that the movie only reminded myself to be myself. Elf is essentially a movie about how we always need to be ourselves and to stick with what makes us really happy. Buddy's journey to find who he is a philosophical question that everyone at one point asks. We all get insecure about the odder aspects about our personality, hinging on whether it's benefiting us or holding us back. The bigger question is that if we are holding back, then what are we holding back from exactly? Our parents? Our expectations of our loved ones? The expectations of a status quo? It just so happens that Christmas time is a period that allows us to avoid, well, so-called expectations, as long as we're showing our love for other people. When Buddy talks about going ice skating, making snow angels, eating cookie dough, and snuggling, I almost feel sorry for him, knowing his dad's gonna reject it all, with Buddy trying to act okay with that. That's not to say that we have to agree with everything someone wants to do, but it does help to think that by doing these small things, it still counts as effort that'll make that person happy. The whole movie is Buddy trying to do small things to make everyone happy, no matter how misguided it is. While the things he does is Christmas-based, he wants to be accepted into his human family. His whole goal is that he's a square peg that can find the right slot. But by the end, he finds that rather than needing to do so much to make him accepted, it's his peers in the city that come to accept him. It's a poignant story that appeals easily to children, encouraging them to embrace the aspects they love about themselves and showcasing that parents can learn as much as their kids can. It's alluring to adults because many are afraid to be like Buddy. Okay, maybe not being a man elf who eats spaghetti candy, but the kind of person that isn't ashamed of showcasing their love for other people. I think that's the aspect of Rankin Bass that the script really wanted to showcase, in which there was always more of a seasonal setting, but an emotional underlining that could still be applied for the 2020s. No matter how different we are, there's always a place for you, no matter who you are. Elf is, and probably will always be, a major Christmas story everyone is going to keep coming back to. But with that, how did writer David Berenbaum come up with a fish out of water story for the holidays? Why did New Line Cinema put their faith into then actor but not director Jon Favreau? How did Will Ferrell get a shot at the role that was going to make him a big star? And of course, how did nostalgia manage to avoid making Elf a dated story and craft something really timeless? Let's ring out the bells and take a look at the history of Elf. If we were to really go back to the beginning, then we probably need to look at the specials that Rankin Bass put out. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into an extensive history of the company. If you want that, my 2-part episode on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer goes into more detail about that, so we'll skip that. But I wanted to touch upon how much of a role they've played for the holidays, as Elf took a lot of the tone and style from them. The Little Drummer Boy, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Frosty the Snowman, and A Year Without Santa Claus are only a few of the specials that the stop-motion company had put out from the 60s through the early 80s. Their simplistic and minimalist style was reflective of where animation was at that time. Little theatrical animated movies were being made, and TV animation, especially from Hanna-Barbera and J. Ward Productions, employed a cheaper style that were still popular with families. The specials from Rankin Bass not only captured some Christmas magic with its inoffensive stories and catchy songs, but the aesthetics even looked like toys that were being played with, like how a child would bring their dolls to life with imagination. I bring this up because that was the intent of the people behind the idea for Elf, screenwriter David Berenbaum and director Jon Favreau. Both grew up in the same time periods they would be influenced. Both would see the Rankin Bass specials as a big Christmas tradition, despite growing up in Jewish households, and both wanted to deliver a new Christmas classic. How the two came together is a good story, but I wanted to talk about their backgrounds as they had very different careers. David had gone into the industry to become a writer. Jon had been acting in Hollywood for over a decade by the time he would shift into more of a behind-the-scenes man. So how did both guys get into where they were? Let's talk about David first. David Berenbaum is a surprisingly hard guy to get a lot of information out of. Not because he's an out-of-work guy or reclusive or anything like that. He just seems to lack a lot of presence online. As far as I was able to look, he doesn't seem to have a website or social media channels of any kind. My first thought was that he was no longer active as a writer, but various film festivals have shown him as a guest speaker. He even hosted a panel on Christmas movies at the 2019 Austin Film Festival with the writer of various Netflix and Hallmark Christmas movies, Karen Schaller, and Matt Lieberman, who wrote the Christmas Chronicles. But is that gonna stop me from getting an episode out? Nope. I just had to really put my research skills onto a higher level and see what I could find. This is why I love websites like Internet Archive. Anyway, David Berenbaum was born sometime in 1971, as I couldn't get an exact birth date, but getting the year was still a big help. He was born and raised within the Philadelphia region, where movies would become a part of his and his older brother Michael's lives. In fact, it was when he saw Jaws at age 9 during a re-release was when he decided that he wanted to do that. Make movies. Being a Gen Xer kid, he grew up during the period in which movies were facing a major shift, especially blockbusters that included Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and Close Encounters. I bring these up because these were some of the favorites of David and wanted to make similar movies. Stories that took people to imaginative worlds with likable heroes. Another trait that he also shared with Steven Spielberg was that he was raised in a Jewish household. This also puts him into a camp that's rare, a Jewish individual who also happens to love Christmas. He's mentioned in several interviews that even with different faiths growing up, he was passionate about Christmas.
Hanukkah was fantastic, but there's something special about Christmas.
There's plenty special about Christmas.
You're running down the stairs, presents are there.
Oh, don't forget that it's
cold outside, it's warm inside.
But what David loved more than anything?
I really love Christmas movies.
David watched Christmas movies
around the clock.
Until the clock struck?
So in a nutshell, this guy loved his classic Rankin Bass. David wanted the warm Christmas atmosphere, and it seemed like the stop-motion stories of Rudolph and Santa were what he was looking for. But was it enough to fulfill his storytelling dreams? They were certainly an influence. He would also watch most movies by Woody Allen, Preston Sturges, Billy Wilder, but was really fond of Frank Capra. Of course, It's a Wonderful Life would end up being a favorite of his, but he was also fond of the stories about ordinary people in extraordinary situations, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It Happened One Night. Both his parents saw that David was a child with storytelling ideas and did what they could to support that. Both of his parents worked, with his mom Cynthia, an employee at a distributor of a baking goods company called Enek Inc., and his father Stanley being an accountant for a now defunct supermarket chain in Philadelphia, the Food Fair. They were able to provide David and his brother with a comfortable upbringing, think middle class, or at least upper middle class. Though David grew up with the Jewish faith, going to temple each Sunday and even celebrating Hanukkah, the family did in fact celebrate Christmas. It had nothing to do with religion. Christmas was a secular celebration. To quote David, "It was never about Jesus. It was about Santa Claus. It was about the buildup of excitement and anticipation, which peaked when I got to run downstairs in my pajamas on Christmas morning, and there were presents, and I was shocked and awed that there was wrapping paper all over the place." Unquote. He would continue to collaborate with his brother at home until Michael would leave for his college years at NYU. He gave David his old Super 8 camera and told him to keep making movies. I wish I could find some of those movies to get a better idea on how a lot of those old movies would end up influencing him. But then again, I made a lot of shorts in my youth that, while I'm proud of, I'm honestly too shy to put them out. Who knows? Maybe I'll do that someday. But back to David. He would continue his film passion, if not making them, then at least going to the movies. He wanted to ensure that he was up to date on the directors that were becoming more popular and somehow matching the material he wanted to create. He never let that affect his academic life, as he was seen as a good student. He was bound to get into the film schools of his choice. Though he briefly considered USC, he would ultimately choose his brother's school, NYU. Again, I had a hard time finding out the specifics of what his days were like, but here's what I was able to find. First of all, he would attend sometime around 1989. By that time, he exited high school and turned 18. Second of all, he saw New York City as the place to get his start. After all, his brother would end up using an internship to get his first work with Coppola as an apprentice editor on The Cotton Club, that would later lead to work on Scorsese's After Hours and on the Coen Brothers' Raising Arizona. During his time at NYU, David would make his lifelong career choice to become a writer. To quote him, "I started writing because that seemed like the best avenue to take to becoming a director. I started writing because I think the foundation of directing is simple storytelling. If you can tell a story, then that's the essential first step." Unquote. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back in a moment.
Love, family, traditions, presents, pumpkins, fireworks, Santa Claus. All make you think of holidays, right? Well, what about murder, heartbreak, gangsters, and witchcraft? Still thinking about holidays? Beginning this February, I will take you on a journey to the lesser-known sides of the holidays, the sides history might try to forget, the celebrations that you might not be familiar with. Oh, and don't worry, I'll be sprinkling in some elements of normal holiday traditions too. After all, even those of us with the dark side still have a special place in our hearts for the Easter Bunny, Valentine's candy, cute jack-o'-lanterns and ghosts, and of course, all things merry and bright. Let's uncover and celebrate the strange and unusual together. I'm your host, Kristen, and this is Holidays After Dark.
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
It would be in the early 90s in which instead of New York, he eyed a move to Hollywood to fulfill his screenwriting dreams. He secured himself a place to stay and a job at a lingerie factory to pay the bills while he worked towards his goal. By day, he would be constructing bras, and by night, he would be typing away, trying to get out one of many ideas he had. In fact, one of them would give him some notice. He had already started to submit his first screenplay called Christmas in New Jersey around a variety of production companies, hoping one would bite. With the success of romantic comedies like Sleepless in Seattle and When Harry Met Sally, it made a lot of sense to go for a genre that was popular. I bet you're wondering what Christmas in New Jersey was about. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a copy available anywhere to read. The best information I could gather was that it was along the lines of being a romantic comedy that was also supposed to be a different kind of retelling of It's a Wonderful Life. It's also not surprising that David chose to make one of his first major scripts as a Christmas movie. The holiday was still on his mind, maybe even more so as he was on the other side of the country away from his family. He had traded the East Coast snowbound Decembers for Southern California year-round sunshine. For a lot of people, this is fantastic. For guys like him, he was reminded even more that he was in a whole new world. David would grow homesick as he couldn't afford to consistently fly back and forth to see his family. And even if he could, his work prevented him from getting a lot of time off, and the little time that he did have was spent either writing or trying to make whatever connections he could. He of course did have his brother Michael, but he was more than busy with his own career, who by 1991 had already moved up to doing sound design on Goodfellas and becoming an editor on Barton Fink. It would be around 1995 in which he was yearning for some of that Christmas magic. He tried to decorate his apartment for the Christmas season, but it wasn't a viable substitute with being around his family. He wasn't able to get back home with a lack of funds, so he did what a 20-something would do to try to cope: watch nostalgic movies. He of course popped on It's a Wonderful Life and Christmas in Connecticut, but it had been a while since he had seen any of those Rankin Bass specials. He tuned in for the annual CBS broadcast, and he ended up getting a lot more than his usual viewing. He would get both warm feelings and a creative spark. What if the traditional misfit at the North Pole was a human? And what if he went to New York to find his dad? Another thing on David's mind was his father. Stanley Berenbaum unfortunately passed away in 1980, which left a 9-year-old David without a dad to grow up with. His mom and brother Michael would do their best to fill that gap, but by 1995, David was now 25 and pondered how different his situation would be had his father lived. How would he have felt about David going broke while going after his movie-making dream? What would he have told him about dating, balancing a checkbook, and at least being able to manage a busy work life while chasing a goal? He really missed him, and wanted to ask a lot of questions about becoming a man. Somewhere in his mind, though, he also felt like there would be interesting questions that a human elf could ask. Where did I come from? Where do I fit in with the human world if I don't belong at the North Pole? Would you be willing to have a misfit as a son? It was here he first got a spark to begin writing what would become Elf. He wanted to try again with another Christmas script after Christmas in New Jersey failed to be picked up. His previous script showed that he could catch the eye of a producer. He just needed something that would gain their attention. His first thought was to ensure that his movie could carry that same spirit of the Rankin Bass tone while remaining timeless. In order to get a human to the North Pole, he took inspiration from Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments. Buddy, like the baby Moses, would be raised with another family, believing one to be their own. Thankfully, with a lot less newborn killing. Along with providing a more comedic curtain with the obvious differences between humans and elves, Buddy's discovery would also fuel his desire to go to New York. Both movies tackled the idea of one trying to find out who they are and how they cannot escape their past. David would also take inspiration from the Tom Hanks comedy Big as well. He was already planning on writing Buddy to be mentally younger than he actually was, giving the story a lot of comedic potential for a child in a man's body to go to New York for the first time. David went as far as to write Buddy having 2 elf parents and a longer sequence of them at a school to set up this man-child and his off-put behavior in the human world. Because David wanted to ensure that his movie would also be a very New York-centered story, he worked to incorporate as much as he could. The Macy's department store was set up as Buddy's first place he went after his dad ejects him. The Empire State Building was always the setting for the publishing company his dad worked at. Rockefeller Plaza was set as his dating site. Central Park was where the climax would take place. He even got to write in a tribute to E.T. by writing the image of Santa's sleigh flying in front of the moon. David would have his first script draft written in 2 weeks. Elf had become a bigger project than he had anticipated. It would be sometime in 1996 when his script started going around to different production companies where he again started to get the same kind of reactions that his Christmas in New Jersey script got. A lot of interest, but not much bite. That would be until the Motion Picture Corporation of America, or the MPCA, finally called. The MPCA had been in the film production business for less than a decade, having been started by Brad Cravoy, who had previously worked under Roger Corman. The company had handled smaller budgeted movies until one of their own comedies, Dumb and Dumber, had been a big hit at New Line Cinema. They really enjoyed the draft for Elf and optioned it, looking at it as a new possible vehicle for Jim Carrey. When you think about how Elf would eventually come out, it's easy to see how this could have worked out for Jim Carrey. It's unknown if any serious talks ever happened though if I had to guess, he probably would have been too expensive as he was about to make $20 million for doing The Cable Guy next. The MPCA had also seen Elf as a potential project for Chris Farley. Yep, Saturday Night Live's Chris Farley.
Now my name is Matt Foley, and I am a motivational Santa. Let me tell you a little bit about myself so that you'll know where I'm coming from. First off, I am 35 years old. I am thrice divorced, and I live at the North Pole in a van down by the river.
I want a super morphing Power Ranger. I want a Power Ranger.
Well, you do you?
Jason is just crazy about that show.
Well, whoop-de-freaking-doo! It's all about presents to you kids, isn't it? You all want to wake up Christmas morning, run down to the tree at light speed. You grab the biggest package that you can, you tear it open, you pop your hand in, and you pull out a dream come true. Well, I got news for you kids. In the real world, you hang up a stocking, the next morning you find it filled to the brim with jack squats!
Like Carey, Farley was becoming a big star thanks to the recent Tommy Boy with David Spade, and someone thought that Elf could really stand out with his persona. I honestly can't see his comedy working well with the role of Elf. I mean, I personally love Chris Farley and the energy he could project, but I don't know if that would have necessarily worked well for a man-child character, or at least as one as innocent as needed. It's also unlikely that any talks happened due to Farley's busy schedule and his drug issues that were really no secret. Though the MPCA had optioned the script for a year and seemed intent on finding a way to work, David realized that the company was just not a good match and let the contract expire. So with no production company interested in Elf, what was next for David? According to him, it would get picked up by another company, but he has yet to say which one. To quote him, "It had gone out and was optioned once, and they put an actor in it, and we were looking at different directors, and nothing sort of materialized from that. And then right after that option expired, it was picked up by another company for another year, and it went down a developmental road, and nothing happened with that either." Unquote. This is actually much more common than you'd think with scripts. Many of them will be optioned only to sit for a while and nothing to happen with that. Elf was unfortunately one of those scripts. If there was anything the Elf script did help with, was David's newest job. At some point in 1996, he submitted a script at Disney as a part of his application for the Writers in Residence program. Though the script didn't get past that, the company was impressed enough that he was accepted into the program. David was getting closer to his dreams as a writer. He was finally getting paid to write over at Disney. It was still sign writing though, and it would be here that if he were going to be working on material given to him, he was still essentially being taught by some of the best writers in the industry for family films. So, if he was going to be at Disney, then where was his script for Elf flying around? How would the film eventually get made at New Line Cinema? How were his years at Disney going to affect his writing on other projects? And of course, what about the other subject who made Elf possible, Jon Favreau? He and David had similar backgrounds but very different outcomes. How would the two find similar ground to get the movies out that they wanted? We'll go into that in our Part 2 episode of The Elf Story. Next week, we'll have a special episode with a fellow Christmas podcaster to talk more about our personal connection with Elf. Until then, see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.